Because all of us understand linear growth. We don't understand exponential growth. And I think Sachin will be able to tell us why Rakesh was such a great embodiment.
So that's a tough one, but I'll try. I think, obviously, what can I say about him that people don't already know? But I will tell you that my journey with him was absolutely enriching. The first way I'll say it is, there would be no IKS without Rakesh Bhaiya. There would absolutely be no IKS. The learning, Dr. Saab, from the journey with him was magical in many ways, but also magical because somehow intuitively, he knew what he needed to teach a technocrat like me in each of the different phases of the company. So starting out, I was an engineer by training. I thought I'm going to write some technology to disrupt US healthcare. Why US healthcare? As you guys know, he was the first one to point out. As you know, he was an India bull, right? But he was the first one to point out to me, even though I was living in the US, that we talk about India, $3.5 trillion economy, growing at 6% real terms, 7%, 13-14% nominal terms. US healthcare, $5 trillion market, growing at 6% real terms. And likely to grow at 6% real terms for the next 3-4 decades because of their demographics. So even though I was living in the US, he is the one who called me and said, boss, you want to build a technology business? Go build it in healthcare, because even as I am an India bull, you have an economy larger than India's entire economy, compounding at 6%, slated to compound at that rate for the next 30 years. So where can there be a bigger opportunity than that? So it started right then, before we even built the business. Then I was a technocrat by training, right? So I basically didn't know how to run a business. So early on, his teachings were all about basics of running a business. How to be frugal, how to innovate with the customer in mind. Biggest thing, cash flow. I didn't know what cash flow even meant. So I remember so many moments where I have gone iteration after iteration with another cash flow to him, another cash flow to him, and he's like, ye cash flow hai? The thing about him was, he was a brilliant teacher, but he was also a very volatile and expressive person. And so the learning came with a lot of other emotion. And so very early on, I learned that I needed to separate the emotion from the content. And I wasn't always successful because, he's such a larger than life man. But when I was successful, the learning was unbelievable. So initial years, the learning was the basics of the business. Focus on cash, cash, cash. Figure out what is the customer value proposition clearly. While you're creating customer value, if you can't figure out unit economics, you have no business model. Right? So the first 2-3 years were just that. Then, as that started to come together, he started, pivoting a little bit and started talking about things like, okay, now he had this 5-pronged framework of what it takes to build a successful company. First was that large market opportunity, right? That's a big thing. Second, a customer value proposition with unit economics. We don't want to create a business that has value for the customer but can't create value for itself. Third, it has to be a really good team. Fourth, does the team innately want to run frugally, right? And fifth, corporate governance. Now, I think 1 or 2 years into the journey, once we understood cash flows, then he started focusing on these 5 aspects of the framework. Then we started moving on. Very strong character, but one of the big things he taught me is to always listen to others. I remember so many of our board meetings where you would come and challenge in the board meeting and say, boss, technology is going to totally disrupt your business. And he would be totally dismissive of you in the board meeting. But later in the night, I would get grilled on saying, boss, what are you talking about? What are you doing about technology? Dr. Saab might be right. Right? So even though his demeanor might be perhaps dismissive, he was always processing and always challenging me to process what the challenges could be ahead, right? Also learning from mistakes. I mean, as you know, he was a big India bull. When we started the business, the US dollar rupee was at 42, right? And he was an India bull. So he said, India is going to grow. That was 2007, big, great times. He said, a lot of money is going to come to India, so the dollar will collapse. So you have to hedge the dollar. We kept hedging the dollar year after year, and we kept losing money. We must have lost as a young business at least 30 crores in hedging. And, he's a man of conviction. So one part of my learning was, and he was the one investing the capital. So he was investing, he was constantly forcing us to hedge. One, I was learning conviction. And second, at some point he said, ab ho gaya, I have learned my lesson. I will never talk to you about hedging. And from that day, he never ever brought up the point of hedging. And then our equation became, boss, you look at the last 20-year trajectory, the dollar has appreciated against the rupee at 3.5% a year. Let us just earn that 3.5%, forget about hedging. Let us focus on how to make money with the business, not on all this financial engineering. So, the ability for a man with that much conviction to first show his conviction, put his money where his mouth is, and then learn that, submit to the reality that he has been wrong. I mean, those learnings are so huge for an entrepreneur. The other thing is his ability to align the investor's interest with the entrepreneur's interest. Right? At some point, we had initially been funded for 25 crores, then we did a rights issue, it became 35 crores, then the business needed more capital. Now, as an entrepreneur, I didn't have any capital beyond a point. I had invested 7-8 crores, that was all the money I had at the time. So the business, we decided we needed another 20 crores. Now, any sensible investor that is a shark will put that 25 crores as equity, because who's going to give debt to a business that has no assets? Against what will the debt be? Now, he realized he already owned 53% of the business. Now, if he would put more equity, then people like me would get so diluted that perhaps my stake will become diminutive. So he said, I will put this capital, I will give you debt against my shares. So he was giving you 100% risk capital, which is equity capital, in the form of debt, so that you don't get diluted, so that the interests don't get misaligned. Now, that level of insight and taking more risk at such a time where most people would say, yeah, this business looks like a bit of a write-off. They had started with a business plan of 25 crores, 45 crores ho gaye, 25 crores aur chahiye, and instead of putting equity, I'm putting debt. So that ability to align the entrepreneur's interest, the kind of loyalty that it created for me, Dr. Saab, after that, half my energy was, I cannot let this man down, right? And perhaps sometimes to a fault. Perhaps sometimes I felt like I was running the business in a way where I wanted him to be proud of me versus running the business. But that was the kind of loyalty that he created through the gestures that he did by aligning our interests. So I think, honestly, there is no end to it. The other thing is, he was an original and critical thinker, as you know. So think about the learning that I got through 15 years of board meetings. 15 years of quarterly board meetings with a man like that. You've seen him on public earnings calls. He doesn't care about who the CEO is. In that company, every board meeting was a grilling. And so think about the learning that came with him. And the most critical questions, right? Excellent board members. The two board members that would ask the most critical questions were you and him. Your question was always around what is tech going to do, and his question was so incisive. So a lot of the learning that eventually came in handy when we started dealing with potential investors in the IPO process was through the cumulative learnings of those 15 years. So honestly, there is really no end to how much one can talk about him. But I can tell you that it was a schooling that I treasure, and that I think is impossible to learn in any other way.
So I think a great example of making sure that you have an investor who has so much faith and confidence in you, because it's quite easy for Rakesh to have said, this is not going anywhere, I'll write this off. And the reality is that is what most VCs do. Call it a spray and pray approach or whatever else. If these guys are doing well, we'll give them more money, we'll double up. If these aren't going well, tough luck, try doing something else. Not only that, because he had that faith, which is remarkable, he also made sure that Sachin had the faith in making sure that the business added value to the customer. I think that's sometimes something we forget about. As an investor, you put on a financial return hat. As an entrepreneur, you figure out, okay, cash flow. But the cash flow came from all the right sources is, I think, important. Because the debt or the equity was used as a bridge. And then I think once you started growing, it just continued growing exponentially, which is remarkable. But there is one thing I need to say. Remember, this was a time when Sachin was in India, when outsourcing wasn't necessarily a politically great thing to be doing. People were critical. You had all these large giants like TCS and everyone else coming in.